um, the Introduction to Civil Law, Unit 2, also known as torts. So we're going to talk mostly about torts. And a tort is a civil wrong. So kind of looking at just an introduction here of civil law, some key terms. We've all heard about crimes. Crimes occur, you break the law, the police deal with it. In civil law, there are torts that you can violate. So a crime is similar to a tort. In criminal law, you have a prosecutor versus a plaintiff in civil law. So the plaintiff is the one bringing the lawsuit against someone else. Defendant, that's the same thing. You're defending yourself in either side. And then you have a conviction, so that a judge or jury will convict someone where there's a final judgment in a civil trial. So looking at some key terms here, civil laws attempt to deal with basic questions, and two of them are this. First, who should be held responsible? So who is liable? Who's responsible for the act? Second, how much should the person be liable for, and should they have to pay damages, which are usually cost of punishment, a lot of times dealing with money. So the damages could be an attempt to fix or remedy. So a remedy is a fix the problem that exists, usually paid off in money. And again, a remedy is something you hear all the time. So like an old remedy would be a fix. So there's a lot of different ways to do this, but the biggest way to do that is money. So some examples here. For each of the following examples, look to try to identify who the plaintiff is and the defendant. Also decide if the defendant should have to pay damages. So let's take your time as we go through these scenarios. So the first one, you have a 14-year-old Carrie who's babysitting a 4-year-old Jill. Carrie leaves Jill in the living room and goes to the kitchen to call her boyfriend. From the kitchen, she can hear but not see Jill. While she is away, Jill falls off a chair and is hurt. Who is the plaintiff? Who is the defendant? And should they be liable? In this case, Jill's parents, not Jill, because she's 4, would be the plaintiff, and they would be suing and bringing a lawsuit against the defendant, Carrie. Could you say they are liable? Possibly. It's Carrie's responsibility to be watching Jill. Number 2, Ben, a high school football player, tackles a teammate in practice. When the teammate hits the ground, his shoulder is dislocated. Who's the plaintiff? Who's the defendant? Should someone be liable? The teammate of Ben, and most likely the parents, would be the plaintiff. They'd be suing Ben, who would be the defendant. However, there's a good chance, because they were playing football, this is an agreement that they both made, and that's how they got hurt, that they don't really have a case here. Ben would probably not be liable for the damages. Number 3, Consuelo leaves a sharp knife on the kitchen table after making a sandwich. A 3-year-old neighbor who has been invited over to play with Consuelo's daughter climbs up on a chair, grabs a knife, and seriously cuts his finger. Who is the plaintiff? Who is the defendant? And are they liable? So in this case, the 3-year-old neighbor and the parents would be the plaintiff. Consuelo would be the defendant. Are they liable? Most likely some liability rests on Consuelo. She invited that individual over to play. She left a knife, and that individual was harmed. So looking at civil cases, 90% of the cases don't go to trial. Again, trials cost a lot of money. Instead, they reach what is called a settlement. So in an agreement, settlement is offered and a few things can happen. So here's what could happen. You can agree to the $5,000 being asked for you, admit that you are liable. You know what? I was wrong. yes, I will pay you, and then you can avoid court costs and things like that. Or you can admit that you are liable but not agree to pay the full amount. So someone's suing you for $5,000. Say, yeah, you know what, I am liable, but not for that full amount, offering to pay some of the damages, so $3,000. Or you could just claim that you are not liable and take the case to court. So you could reach a settlement, pay the whole thing, maybe reach a settlement, an agreement in the middle, or you can go to court. And there are three types of torts that we're going to talk about throughout this unit. We have intentional wrongs, which are intentional torts. It occurs when a person knows or has some intent of injuring a person or property or both. There's negligence, which is something that is done unintentionally when you fail to use reasonable care. You cause harm because you didn't use reasonable care, and that's the most common tort that occurs. Or lastly, strict liability occurs when the defendant is engaged in something that is very dangerous, and if something goes wrong, you have no excuses. You can't defend yourself because it was a dangerous activity.